I'm only going to talk to you just for a minute or so this evening because I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. So I ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love, a prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to improve the quality of our life and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land, and dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Got to revolt in such a way that after revolt is over, we can live with people as our brothers and our sisters. Our aim must never be to defeat them or humiliate them. On the night of the state ball, standing up talking with some people, Mordecai Johnson called my attention to the fact that Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah was out dancing with the Duchess of Kent. I said, isn't this something? Here it is, a once serf, the once slave, now dancing with the Lord on an equal plane. And that is done because that is no bitterness. These two nations will be able to live together and work together because the breaking of loose was through nonviolence and not through violence. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation. The aftermath of violence, however, is bitterness. And this is the thing I'm concerned about. Let us fight passionately and unrelentingly for the goal of justice and freedom. But let's be sure that our hands are clean in the struggle. Let us never fight with falsehood and violence and hate and malice, but always fight with love, so that when the day comes that the walls of segregation have completely crumbled in Montgomery, that we will be able to live with people as our brothers and sisters. Oh, my friends, our aim must be not to defeat Mr. Englehart, not to defeat Mr. Sellers and Mr. Gale and Mr. Parks. Our aim must be to defeat the evil that's in them. But our aim must be to win the friendship of Mr. Gale and Mr. Sellers and Mr. Englehart. We must come to the point of seeing that our ultimate aim is to live with all men as brothers and sisters under God, and not be their enemies or anything that goes with that type of relationship. And this is one thing that Garner teaches us, that you can break a loose from evil through nonviolence, through a lack of bitterness. And Nkrumah says in his book, when I came out of prison, I was not bitter toward Britain. I came out merely with a determination to free my people from the colonialism and imperialism that had been inflicted upon them by Britain. But I came out with no bitterness. Because of that, this world will be a better place in which to live. There's another thing that Garner reminds us. I'm coming to the conclusion now. Garner reminds us that freedom never comes on a silver platter. It's never easy. Garner reminds us that whenever you break out of Egypt, you better get ready for stiff battle. You better get ready for some homes to be bombed. You better get ready for some churches to be bombed. You better get ready for a lot of nasty things to be said about you, because you're getting out of Egypt, and whenever you break a loose from Egypt, the initial response of the Egyptian is bitterness. It never comes with ease. It comes only through the hardness and persistence of life. Garner reminds us of that. You better get ready to go to prison. When I looked out and saw the Prime Minister there with his prison cap on that night, that reminded me of that fact. That freedom never comes easy. It comes through hard labor, and it comes through toil. It comes through hours of despair and disappointment. That's the way it goes.
I conceive of this struggle not as a struggle to free 20 million Negroes in the United States, but a struggle to free 180 million citizens of this country. And I don't think anybody in this country can be truly free until the Negro is free. And I certainly don't think the white man is free as long as you have segregation and discrimination, because the festering sore of segregation debilitates the white man as well as the Negro. And this is why I say that our aim in this struggle is not to defeat or to humiliate the white man, but to win his friendship and understanding. And the end is reconciliation and the creation of the beloved community. We are not seeking to annihilate the opponent, but to convert him. And this is why we follow nonviolence. I think the end of violence is to get rid of, to annihilate the opponent. But in the nonviolent movement, the end is to convert the opponent and to bring about a society where all men will live together as brothers and every man will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. I don't mean you would have brotherhood by federal force. I don't think you can really have true brotherhood by federal force. I do think, though, that you can break down the legal and the external and the man-made barriers that make brotherhood impossible by federal force. In other words, I don't think you can have brotherhood as long as there is a system of racial segregation. Now, I do feel that this system can be broken down by federal force. Now, when you move to the realm of true brotherhood, or true integration, which is genuine intergroup, interpersonal living, mutual acceptance, then we move into another realm altogether. And I don't think this can be done by federal force, but I think that these barriers can be broken down and it can bring us nearer to the goal. I would like to see it under the 14th Amendment, which says that no state has a right to deny an individual equal protection of the law. And every state has a responsibility, it has the authority to give these businesses licenses to operate. And the fact that this is done by the state means that these businesses at that moment forfeit the right to deal with individuals any way they please. They must be under the scrutiny and under the direction of federal authority on the basis of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
Well, an extension of that then would mean that all of us who are licensed to drive automobiles would come within state scrutiny for whatever purpose they wish to do. The state's hand extends everywhere, you see.
Oh, yes, it extends everywhere where basic human constitutional rights are involved. And I'm absolutely convinced that there's something wrong with a nation that would put property rights over human rights. And I think states should have rights, but no state should have the right to do wrong. And this is why we have a 14th Amendment, to regulate these wrongs that are often committed.
Let us always realize that we don't have to hate as we try to straighten this situation out. Let us always realize that we don't have to become bitter as we try to straighten this situation out. No, my friends, if that is any one thing that I would like for you to remember this evening, it is the fact that somebody must have some sense in this world. Somebody must have sense enough to meet hate with love. Somebody must have sense enough to meet physical force with soul force. And if we will but try this way, we will be able to change these conditions and yet at the same time win the hearts and souls of those who have kept these conditions alive. And I know the temptation. I know the temptation which comes to all of us. We've been trampled over so long. I know the temptation that comes to all of us. We've seen the viciousness of lynching mob with our own eyes. We've seen police brutality in our own lives. We are still the last heart in the first fire. So many doors are closed in our faces. And that is the temptation for us to end up with bitterness. And I understand these people who have ended up in despair. I understand why there are some who have been a little misguided and they've ended up feeling that the problem can't be solved within. And so they talk about racial separation rather than racial integration. I understand their response. I have analyzed it psychologically and I understand it. But in spite of the fact that I understand it, I must say to them in patient terms that that isn't the way. I must say to them in patient terms that black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy. And God is not interested merely. God is not interested merely in the freedom of black men and brown men and yellow men. But God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race and the creation of a society where all men will live together as brothers. No, we need not hate. We need not use violence. That is another way. A way as old as the insights of Jesus of Nazareth. As modern as the techniques of Mohandas K. Gandhi. That is another way. A way as old as Jesus saying, love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that despitefully use them. And as modern as Gandhi saying through Thoreau, non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. That is another way. A way as old as Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. And when he said that, he realized that turning the other cheek might bring suffering sometime. He realized that it may get you home bombed sometime. He realized that it may get you stabbed sometime. He realized that it may get you scarred up sometime. But he was saying in substance that it is better to go through life with a scarred up body than a scarred up soul. That is another way. This is what we've got to see.
Deep down in our nonviolent creed is the conviction that there are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they're worth dying for. And if a man happens to be 36 years old, as I happen to be, and some great truth stands before the door of his life, some great opportunity to stand up for that which is right, he's afraid his home will get bombed, or he's afraid that he will lose his job, or he's afraid that he will get shot or beat down by state troopers. He may go on and live until he's 80, but he's just as dead as 36 as he would be at 80, and the cessation of breathing in his life is merely the belated announcement of an earlier death of the spirit. He died. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. So we're going to stand up right here amid horses. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid billy clubs. We're going to stand up right here in Alabama amid police dogs if they have them. We're going to stand up amid tear gas. We're going to stand up amid anything that they can muster up, letting the world know that we are determined to be free.
Welcome to my podcast. Hey, you're listening to the JOYFull Podcast. This is a raw journal of the mindful revolution. My name's Ethan Sherritt. If you didn't get that already, this one's not going to have an intro. I had some selected speeches from Martin Luther King, and obviously it started with the one from his death, the very same day, I believe it was Robert Kennedy who made that eulogy and had to have something together to tell everybody at that point in time and address it, that MLK was shot. And the reason I put that one first is because I'm recording this on January 15th, Martin Luther King's birthday. However, when we think of MLK, we think of the time after him. He was assassinated. Assassinated, man. And when someone is assassinated like that, it makes you just hold a magnifying glass to what they really meant and what they did. Not that we need a magnifying glass, because at that time, that stretch of, I guess it was from 56 or 57, when he started really gathering a lot of meetings, maybe 56 meetings by the time of 1961, 1962, he had an absolute movement, unified with some of those. I selected some of those speeches to really highlight the philosophy that he had that was unique, that I think created that solidarity behind his specific philosophy. He had a specific philosophy now. And to give you a little background in case you forgot or in case you didn't know, let's see, he got a bachelor's degree from Morehouse College, another theological degree from Crozer Theological Seminary, and then his doctorate in philosophy from Boston University. And he became a preacher at a couple different, I believe 2 different churches, one in Atlanta and one in Montgomery, Alabama. By 1959, 1960, 1961, his philosophy was so identified as compared with everything else. He chose like mathematically the best one to win for people, and that's why the selected speeches that I chose to kind of string together, some of them really hammered home that like that was not just it definitely was not a let's be afraid of being whipped, so let's use nonviolence. Let's be afraid of a battle. It was, this battle's gonna hurt, but this is a freaking battle, and you guys can be proud of this. And this is a doctorate of philosophy now, who studied a lot of ways that I guess the biggest way of the time. I love it. Clip number 2 that I chose. He talks about Gandhi. He says it with a different accent, Ghana, but he talks about Gandhi, and he talks about Gandhi so reverently, just because he lays out how violence against nonviolence, what's going to happen in the end. One's about annihilation, and one is about amending. And how, I mean, I don't need to say anything. Just dwell on that for a minute. The mathematical superiority he laid down of how to overcome what they were up against with civil rights in this country, and with division in this country. And we can apply that to division. I really want to apply that to, there's no lack of civil rights laws anymore, thanks to what MLK did, thanks to his leadership. We don't need the federal government to make, I don't believe, any more laws, because he brought it the right way. He said in one of those speeches, actually I don't think the one that he mentioned specifically at the moment of time, I believe it was in 1961, he was giving a speech. He's like, all right, that's 285 cities now that have integrated their lunchrooms at their schools. These are city laws, but he was pressing for a federal law that would say, hey, if you want a license to do business, you're going to have to honor the 14th Amendment, which freed everyone and made everybody equal who's alive in this country. Oh, man, that was one of the good clips. Let me go through them a little bit. So the first one was the eulogy from Robert F. Kennedy. And the one thing I took from that was the immediacy of the address, the spontaneity. You could hear the reaction. Like, in this day and age, it's hard to like make an announcement that people hadn't heard of. You know, you get it, you get things intimately, and there's not a crowd reaction of learning something together. But you felt that. And I'm sure a lot of people already did know, but there were a few people that he announced that to that it hit them to the core. And you can feel that moment in time where the people were a little bit lost. And so that's why that clip strikes me is what could he get together? How could RFK, who I don't know that much about, but wow, he mentioned that I sure have something in common with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's family, his own brother was shot, and he added that, yeah, that was a white guy too. That's definitely food for thought that he mentioned that. And then just how he closed it on a poem by I guess Aeschylus, was it? But that our goal, one of the highest goals, the pursuit of man, in which in the USA we should get closer to this than any nation ever has. A unified mission to, as that poem said, to tame the savageness of man and to make gentle the life of this world. It's a noble spiritual pursuit that kind of transcends secularism, religious belief, inner salvation, to learn how to be a higher being than just an animal. And we have that ability, and it takes work and discipline and togetherness. And I mean, I think in our hearts we know that that's the freaking goal of this whole wacky experiment. is to see if we're really animals or not, or to see if we can have some sense and unify, like some of the leaders we've had have pointed out, whether it's Martin Luther King or Gandhi or Jesus of Nazareth or who else? Throw in who else you want in there. Philosophers that, I don't know, philosopher could mean a theorist of some kind, but I think through the clips that I've shown, Martin Luther King was far from a theorist. He mentioned he was there on the front lines, leading on location. The specifics is why I chose one of these clips. Number 5. All right, we'll get to number 5. Remember, make a bookmark of that, number 5. That number 1 was the eulogy from Robert F. Kennedy, and wow, powerful stuff, important stuff. Number 2, this is a long speech of Martin Luther King. This is called "The Birth of a New Nation." It was segmented on this album. This one was called Part 7, in which he mentioned that this is when he talked about Gandhi and his understanding that Gandhi had the way. I loved how Martin said that there are old ways as old as Jesus of Nazareth's insights. It's a personal, I love it how he said the insights of Jesus of Nazareth. And when he says it that way, you can appreciate the genius of the insights and the ideas and the philosophy and the theory, rather than when somebody says, as Jesus Christ, the Lord, my Savior, instructs us to behave in the following way. That's a weird, dogmatic, religious way. He said the insights of this amazing philosopher, genius, Jesus of Nazareth, turn the other cheek. Love thy enemy. These are mathematic ways that he showed our superior to lead to a better outcome, to convert your oppressor, to convert your opponent in events of this magnitude. So he said that, and then he said the modern ways, modern contemporary theories from like Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi was he was practiced in the inner workings of Buddhism, which Martin Luther King didn't say this, but actually the contemporary practice that Gandhi was doing was applicable specifically to India being ruled by the British and what his people of color were going through at that time. However, the inner workings that Gandhi was familiar with from Buddhism, remember, make no mistake, they're contemporary, but they're not modern. They're not new. They're not of a certain age. They're ancient, like 4,000 years plus in an individual level. Anyway, that was the second clip, The Birth of a New Nation, Part 7. And I love that, and how he said that freedom never comes easily. And I'd like to distinguish between like how that could be heard nowadays. Freedom doesn't come easy. That means we gotta like have a grenade launcher and guided missiles and storm under the cover of darkness and risk our lives to go and like into a hostile area and kill the hell out of a bunch of bad guys. That's freedom not coming easy either. That's freedom on the front lines. But freedom not coming easy, as Martin Luther King was talking about, was you are going to be cursed, punched, your friends, family, yourself might get their leg ripped off in a bomb in a church. You're going to be spit on by people who just can't get used to this new age. That's what he was talking about. So when he said the fight in that clip, the battle, and hanging in there, it wasn't like it through aggression. It was through those Gandhi, those Jesus teachings, the Jesus teaching of turning that other cheek regardless of what happens, and that's some big balls. All right, third clip. This was called Brotherhood, and let's see. Oh, this one was interesting. This one was when he said he was kind of like mellow talking to an interviewer, and in that day and age, the way that this guy was grilling him, you could put that guy as the modern day like Fox News counterpoint to your movement. Like, the slippery slope of what you're talking about, Martin Luther King, is that now, so you're saying that by wanting this federal protection for people to buy goods, to eat at any restaurant, you're saying that the federal government should thereby be able to tell every single person what to do with their business and have its hand in everything. The guy, I think it was something like the state's hand extends everywhere then. And Martin Luther King absolutely kept his cool. He wasn't trying to keep his cool. He was just cool because he was authentic. He was speaking so much from the heart. And he said, yes, the state's hand extends to where there are basic human rights. And he made that distinction. Like, we can get into other aspects of business or where the state's hand ends later. But what I'm talking about is basic human rights. And he said, there is a problem, sir, basically, he said, if the state puts property rights in front of human rights. And I'm not sure if that interview extended and they kept on talking about it. The clip that I found, it really seemed to be like, you can't argue with that. We have a fluid, moving type of law in this country that's ideally evolving towards the best thing possible, and therefore usually is the best thing possible, although in these times this is a big step forward that made it way closer to the best thing possible. Man, he shut that guy up by saying, man, I don't even like saying shut that guy up. He reminded that guy of the love that was in his heart for this. He said, there's something seriously wrong if we put property rights in front of human rights. The other thing you're talking about, and the slippery slope of the long arm of the law, if a precedent is established here with this amendment you're talking about, MLK, he said, we can regulate that. We can regulate that regulation later. What I'm talking about is we're going to establish ourselves as a nation in agreement that human rights are going to be figured out, sorted out, and agreed upon, and then we can argue about what property rights are later, once we've established our human rights. So that's why I like that clip number 3 there. All right, number 4. Clip number 4. This one was called The Better Way. That one just brought me to freaking tears, because he was again asserting how by following this non-violent way and by reminding everybody that resisting the temptation of bitterness and hatred about your opponent, that will allow this togetherness. Is that the one when he said there's going to be it's possible to create this symphony of brotherhood? Something like that. The other one was called Brotherhood, but this one, he said, we're going to be part of a great new building process to have a more highly evolved USA. And damn, if that guy was pretending he loved the United States of America and all that it's supposed to be, he sure has me fooled, because he loved the USA and he painted a picture of it, I think, as we all thought it was as kids, before we realized how much give and take there always is to do. And he brought it back to, that's frickin' possible to exist at the higher plane, so that the things we're solving, and this is my podcast is about propelling this thing of joining through your internal development, developing a society that can work together to solve way bigger problems than surface distractions. We don't have to worry about like problems to solve. Let's come together with the ridiculous, stupid ones, so that we can figure out how to solve problems of economic balancing, landfills where we put all trash, recycling, the use of materials, getting a society that doesn't use so much electricity, therefore doesn't need so much fossil fuels, getting off of chemical drugs, those types of things. Huge, massive, shifting swings that we could have together if we could just promote an awareness of the inner self that doesn't fall victim to the distraction, not techniques, but distractions to which our amazing capitalist society requires us to use. Like when we want to be good at our job and we work in the news, it's not like a technique we're using to ruin the country to highlight the bad stuff and make it seem bigger than it is, and to highlight the division and make it seem bigger than it is. It's not like a technique of evil. We're just trying to be good at our job. We're trying to make people watch our channel more than the other channel. So we're going to make the more inciting, the more exciting, and therefore inciting of violence or division type of news story that there is. I mean, I've talked about it in other episodes that's called the, I think I made this term up, it's the perceived relevance fallacy. And it's, if you have 100 people behaving in a certain way, and 2 people at an event, and 2 people are behaving in a different way, in a bad way, then the news is going to show those 2 people from every angle. And nowadays, we're so smart at it and savvy because we're going to school just for journalism and competing for jobs in journalism with other people who went to school. I got a job on freaking CNN or Fox because you know how to make a piece. You're going to show those 2 people who are a tiny, tiny minority of like an event, and I'm specifically thinking of the most recent one I remember here in the state of Virginia where I am, of Charlottesville, where there's like 30 people or less storming, aka walking around at and mouthing off at some event, and they made everybody watching from coast to coast for 30 to 90 people or something like that. I'm pretty sure it was more along the lines of 30 or less. They made them seem like that was this giant wave that had to be dealt with through their coverage of that. And more and more young kids that are learning how that works, and that are learning that you can't be swayed by that through mindfulness and through developing yourself, that they're not going to fall victim to that. But it still works now, that if you show that tiny minority of people who are popping off, all of a sudden, coast to coast, they're going to think like, wow, look at this. Look at how many crazy white supremacists there are still. Man, there may be 1,000. That's a pretty small, freaking tiny fraction of the United States. And it's so small that there's probably more dementia of other specific, like really specific. There's probably like more people who believe that they're a superhero, that are locked up in some psychiatric ward over the world than there are people who agree with some of the things that the news, if produced in a way that they do, they can show us, make it seem very, very relevant and widespread when in fact it's not. One of the other clips I have, Martin Luther King, which one was, I just got done talking about the building of a new nation. I think that it's not in the one, I didn't get this one, but in one of his most famous speeches that I'm probably going to end with, that Have a Dream speech. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play a little bit of the end of it. But he did remind everybody that these demonstrations that he was asking for, organizing flawlessly all over the place, with diehard support that understood everything he said, that was behind it, that said, yes, that philosophy is perfect, and I agree with it, and I will do it, and I agree with your courage, and I want to have that courage too. I'm behind it. That type of energy. Martin Luther King reminded people, and I believe the I Have a Dream speech and several others, that don't be fooled and think that the small number of people who are basically belligerent represent any amount of us. It's a very small percentage of people who are doing that, and he just, don't be fooled. He glossed over it. I've been talking about that, I feel like, for 30 minutes now, because it's such a big deal to me what the news can do to people who watch it. I don't watch it anymore because it's been just the same thing except accelerating since I used to watch it a few years back. But I do not watch it anymore. I read some articles, probably too much, and I read on a given topic many different headlines that sound in different ways to kind of piece things together, and then I hear what people say about it. But as far as being glued to the news, man, that can suck you in, and that can give you a lot of heartache, a lot of stress. That's it's not genuine, and it's stuff that usually makes it feel like it's out of your control, and makes you feel like there's no point of controlling anything because everything is so freaking whacked. So pull away from it and control what you can control, and vote. And anyway, it's me on my soapbox. What was I just talking about? I think I was saying like Martin Luther King, yada, yada, yada. I support what he stood for. Did I talk about what he said at the Brown Chapel? The specifics there. Yes, that's where I got sidetracked. When I said he was far from a theorist, he studied philosophy, and he wanted to be able to have thought a lot of different philosophies out and be able to talk about it, but he was a practitioner, an activist, a leader through example. When he was down in Alabama, he was saying, we're going to stand here, and he painted the picture of literally what he was looking at. There's horses. You know how scary a freaking horse is when you're on foot and you're holding hands with somebody and you're like, yeah, I don't have a gun. What I'm doing is I'm holding this dude's hand and this woman's hand on the other side, and there's like 8 guys on giant horses there with hooves clomping on the ground, and those guys have guns. And he mentioned the billy clubs and the tear gas and what might happen to you when a billy club comes upside of your head momentarily. He was talking about freaking momentarily. This will be happening right here, right now. In a calm way, I might add. So, man, I want to make everybody who hears this maybe think that they can infuse in themselves a toning down of sorts of the hate towards what they disagree with. And I think anybody who's listening to this has probably been on like maybe both sides of like some kind of, man, why is it about like the president so much, about like the top, like the very executive branch? Like we're like, oh man, I guess it's by far the most visible person, but we're always like against or for the presidential actions. And the president we have sitting right now sure draws a lot of people's anger, and he can make you just get sucked into like 45 minutes a day or more of what bad things there are to say about him. And I knew people, there's definitely people in my family, my father, just conservative people, when Obama was a sitting president, they would suck 45 minutes to 2 hours of their day up every single day of things that they could share about their opposition towards how they felt about that guy. And what I want to remind us all is that there's a lot of time that we spend doing that the mindfulness revolution is going to make kids not be victim to that anymore, because they're starting to study more and more what inside of your brain, there's something, when you're doing that, there's something that's not working on yourself. There's something that's focused externally, and there's a chemical that's released that is satisfying a certain part of your day, of your psyche, that's not being addressed by you. And to address yourself, it takes you away from the things, one, you can't control, and two, the things that make your brain feel hot with chemical hatred, exterior level. And it makes you seek more peace in what you can do and what you can share, that actually makes, if you do want a world that is more gentle in the life of this world and less savage through our divine human ability to think and choose our actions, if you do want that for yourself and for your fellow brothers and sisters, it makes you think about how to get that internally and not focus on the external. Mindfulness revolution, you and me, we may not realize it as much as some of the younger kids are, but there's some pretty cool movements happening worldwide where they're not going to be suckers for some of these things that we're allowing ourselves to be distracted by. And I encourage you and me to get on that sooner than later, because it's all smiles, and the possibilities are, like Martin Luther King was saying, like, dude, this one dude who was oppressed, and the royal family, Prime Minister of India and the royal family of Britain, somehow were doing a press conference where there's dancing and stuff like that, and it was pretty much the height of achievement for the nonviolent opposition and the solidarity and the love that Martin Luther King was talking about. This sure is rambling, but you guys have been good listening so far, if you're still listening. It's been emotional for me for the last few days trying to put these together, and I'm gonna talk about, should I talk about race a little bit? I should at least state my statement on racism, and that's that I don't like racism. And I think it can go the way of diseases that we no longer have, because they've been thought out. Polio, or any of those other diseases that we don't have anymore because they've been thought through. Chickenpox. Did you realize that, like, anybody over, I think, 32 or 33 years old, probably, we used to have to get chickenpox in order to, like, overcome it. They don't get it anymore. They inoculate for it in like a safe shot. It's standard now that, like, kids don't get chickenpox anymore. So, in just that same way, I know that as much as we're learning about the brain, and we will not hold accountable this thing that it kind of shows itself as racism if we don't know enough about it. But we're going to start learning more about it, and realizing that it's another instinct of our evolutionary minds that groups things together and actually can be dealt with scientifically. When we do that en masse as a people, more and more, which I think we're going to be really close to. We don't realize how close we are to that. We're going to start realizing and highlighting a bigger problem to address, and that's the issue of poverty. And we're going to start being able to say, wow, there's a poverty issue to address. Yeah. So it's amazing what's all been done from the time of, just to think of how much equality of the law there is now. Equality of the law. Now there's not equality of practice and of business, and that has to do with historic and systemic poverty. We'll get into that. And ideally we'll just have less and less of our time focused on, like, these surface trivial distractions, like what's going on between black people and white people, and we will realize that, alright, very serious and extremely easy to understand poverty problem. There is one race of people that started arriving as freaking property 275 years ago, only as property. And that people has nothing in common historically with the group of people that had people coming over with family seals that can be traced back like 400, 600 years ago. I had a boss that, man, this guy he was amusing. What a good boss, a great businessman. But what he liked to do in his free time was like go to Sweden, where his family came from, and like trace back their history to like 500 years ago, and see the crest, the family like crest, that he could trace back and be like, yeah, we've been well off since, before the United States was even like freaking discovered or something. And then my family used it as a sheer business endeavor, and so obviously that guy's family's well off, and he was my boss. He was his job was basically just to manage what the assets that he inherited in his family that had money since before they arrived in the U.S. So there's one of the big prevailing races. I just hate that term races so much, but the one big prevailing race of us Anglo-Saxons, or whatever you want to call us, I don't know what the hell the term is, that some of us had family lines that set up, family comforts. A family will take care of you. If you can't make it, then your family's got your back. Well, going back 400 or 500 years, there are no family crests of people that were brought over as on purpose with nothing, so that they could be very similar to animals, because nothing, and then therefore made property. And when you realize the large scale of that, and you can put that on a map and count out impoverished neighborhoods, the less money your family had, less money if you have a lot of families that don't have any money, you have a lot of families that couldn't bail their kids out when they got in trouble, take care of them. And that's just math. We got to address that, how to enlighten and educate the youth more from areas that are historically like just hand-me-down poverty. Not hand-me-down wealth, hand-me-down freaking poverty. And that goes along with, I don't want to be too depressing about that, because I'm also absolutely astounded and amazed that given that crazy dichotomy of history, how much togetherness and how much success is found all throughout everybody, black, brown, yellow, white, purple, green, blue, throughout this country is. And that's the spirit, that's the heart of humankind, that's the heart of humankind that makes that possible. How awesome and together, and how many possibilities there truly are. But I really think that once we stop thinking that there's like this false dichotomy of any races, we're just going to realize the mathematics of historical poverty that there are. And we're going to hopefully start to just have some more compassion and address that there are countless neighborhoods, countless populations that we need to pour our resources and our brain power into, how to increase the learning potential, from pre-K all the way up, to just build stronger, smarter families throughout the poor folks. Because you can make it from being poor. You can. There's a lot of people that have done it. But it's not as easy, and if you have 1,000 well-off people, and if you slip through the cracks, they're way more likely to be picked up and be okay and not end up in prisons. If you have 1,000 poor people, and you got a lot more likely to struggle with how to make it, obviously. Man, I encourage you to, one of the guests that I had on a podcast last year, his name is Paul Rucker. I encourage you to go on to, if you can get through them, man, there's some hard videos to watch, but if you can get through some of his art installations, he's got this graphic that shows it shows a map of the United States and then prisons being built as like these little light bulbs on the map. It's an amazing work of graphic illustration, and it's like staggering where those freaking prisons are and how many of them there got to be, like especially after like 1991 in the late 80s and stuff like that. Bam! It's crazy, these prisons. Anyway, we need to think about that. We need to put our think tanks on that, and we don't need to put our think tanks on how to make like better, awesome video games with what is it called? Virtual reality. Yeah, just to bring more people together so we can really tackle problems together. Man, let's tackle a big problem, get together, and then tackle those other problems once we're together. That's my big thing in this podcast. I don't know how I got to that, but I guess maybe it's on my mind. Now, I have 2 more clips for you from Martin Luther King. And this one is, it's the day after he died. And in every clip of him speaking, there was like, I don't know, you tell me if you feel it, but there was like this hope and this like love and this, I guess, a vision, a balanced, like a path. Like it was like, climb on board, man, I got you. It was just like this, like we knew where we were going, and how much he just hammered home that the way is non-violence. And again, a clip that I don't think I got, but there's an interview he gave where somebody said, hey, if such and so happens, like if they pass this bill in this state or that state, can you tone it down? Are we going to have less demonstrations? And Martin Luther King said, you know what? Because he was in control of it, he said, we may have less demonstrations in that one city, but the demonstrations are going to continue until like such and such other thing happens in this other city. Very calmly, like the guy asked him, will you stop these peaceful demonstrations for a while? And he told them the conditions under which he would, as if it was as easy as him like holding his hand up and saying stop or go. And that's how cool and peaceful they were. They were simply like a nuisance. Like the city would have to deal with it. Nobody was getting hurt. I mean, unless one of the police officers beat the hell out of one of the peacefully hand-holding demonstrators. But MLK seemed like there was such a force of people doing that work with him, agreeing in a unified way. It came across in this one clip. I wish I had it. I couldn't find it, I think, right before I started developing this. But so that calmness, that unified front, that agreeing of nonviolence, and then I'm going to play for you this clip the day after he was assassinated. And see if you could tell the chilling loss that you can tell. People are, this was in New York, in Central Park, and I guess, man, it just seemed like a bunch of people had no clue what to do, so they just gathered there. That's what it seems like if you listen to some of the audio of this. And there's a bullhorn or a megaphone, and they were kind of just, people were letting anybody grab it, and a lot of people were there that were some writers, some musicians playing songs, but they would also just let anybody grab it. I mean, and there were people would sing, and they were singing mourning songs and trying to get together, but there was, he said, no, nonviolence, 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 nonviolence. He gets killed, and all of a sudden people are like, what do we do now? Let's get crazy. And there was some balance to that. Some people at this event were also saying, like, remember what he said, remember what he said. But it just gave, without his voice to say what was right, nobody had big enough courage, a big enough stature, that it was almost like people weren't afraid to be on the crazy flip side of that. And including, like, this clip is going to start off with a guy who is on the crazy end of that, who, it reminds me of, like, a guy that would be shown on today's type of news, saying, all right, let's get violent, let's get crazy now. And Martin Luther King, literally 2 days prior, the day before his death, he said, I'm not afraid of dying. We know where we're going. I've told you basically that our lives are in jeopardy when we do this, but this is the way. And then he's dead, and then so people are like, let's make up our own new chaotic, crazy way. But there were people, man, so it's going to start off with one guy saying, let's get violent now, and people disagree with that. And just see if you can tell the difference of the vibe. With the guy's voice just not being present on Earth anymore. So I guess it's up to us to really do what we can to not just be like Christmas Day, it goes away the day after Christmas, not Christmas anymore. Day after Martin Luther King Day, it's not Martin Luther, let's just forget it. Remember, dude, there are heroes like Gandhi, Jesus, Martin Luther King. Remember, those are like the biggest deals we have to take all throughout time. And all right, well, just listen. Like, just imagine the clips I've been playing you about peace and everything, and listen to this. But also, listen to the people that are terrified that it is going to careen off the tracks and go away from what MLK was stating, all right?
This ain't getting us nowhere. This non-violence just died. We gotta have violence out here. That's right. You white people out here to vindicate yourself. I'm tired of this now. We black people have to have a stand. We gotta stand. You hear that? I'm from the high, and I know. I'm from Bedford Stuyvesant. No, you can't. I ain't finished. Black power. Black power. Beep, beep. Bang, bang. Oogawa. Black power.
Not here for violence. People, I'd like to say we're not here for violence. We're here to mourn a man who
was great to all of us. I want to make a statement to the white people in this audience right now. First of all, I think that just a minute. We are not going to get this place. Just 1 second. All right, first, I think that the people who came here to mourn and to mourn only should stay here. But there are people who came here for another reason, and I think they should go somewhere else.
Chaos. Chaos. One day later. I'm going to end by saying thank you, God bless, namaste, and just a little bit of the speech that we all just can't, hear too much. And just, I don't know what else to say. Just, there's not a whole lot of people that come by like this. So, man, thank God we got the day off of work. But when we're talking about heroes, and we're talking about courage, just let's not forget it.
This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the herbaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Thank you so much for listening to the JOYFull Podcast, and God bless. Namaste. Learn how to meditate. Learn how to do something that helps you internally. Learn how to do anything new. Well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Love you all.